Hey everybody, this is Bob Wheeler with ClearedJobs.Net, welcoming you to our latest episode of Military Monday. It's September the 19th, and it's noon on the East Coast. So we're going to take about 30 minutes here or so to chat with somebody by the name of Fabian Byrd. He's a recruiter at Amazon Web Services, and not only is he doing that job, but prior to that, Fabian spent quite a bit of time in the Army. Started out Signals Corps and is then a recruiter there. So today, I'm going to be talking with Fabian about the differences between the recruitment process that brought you into the military, whether you came in as enlisted or came in as an officer, and the recruitment processes of getting into the private sector. So before we get into the details, Fabian, you want to say hello to everybody and let us a little bit know about your background there?
Sure, sure. So once again, I'm Fabian Byrd. I'm retired Army. I spent 24 years in the Army. Started out at Signal Corps, and then after 12 years of serving in the Signal Corps, I switched over to Army recruiting, where I spent the last 12 years of my career. And now I am in the private sector recruiting field, where I started out with two other like a company called Circo, and then also over to a company called Paraton. That's their name right now. And now I am actually with Amazon AWS.
Outstanding. So Fabian, when we did our little intro talk, for Military Mondays, we like to just bring about topics that are going to help all service members, and we
Hmm.
always try to find things that are specific. But since you had some time as a recruiter, and my last 3 years in the Navy, I recruited doctors, nurses, and dentists. So I wasn't a career recruiter like you were, but I certainly worked with those guys and gals and did the 3 years on the bag of recruiting doctors and nurses and dentists. Like I said, there are some things that are similar and there's some things that are different, between the military recruitment process. So let's wanted to kind of start with just the reminding people what it took to get into the military. What kind of remember walk us through exactly what everybody had to go through, and also what the recruiter had to go through to get somebody into the military.
Okay, well, initially, let's start with the recruiter. You definitely have to be a salesman as a military recruiter, because you're not only selling them on like a job or anything like that. You're selling them on a actual lifestyle. So you can imagine the civilian sector doesn't care if you get up and do physical training in the morning. They give you a certain number of vacation days for you to take, and you can take them at will. Well, in the military, that's something that you can't do. But shifting to what it takes to get in the military, initially you're going to have to be mentally qualified. And what I mean by that is you have to take the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. And once you pass that, then you move on to the physical, where you actually have to pass a physical. So there are so many components where in the military sector you could be disqualified. For instance, age, physical condition, prior service, law violations, your education, marital status, the number of dependents that you have. All of this plays a role in you entering the military service versus in the private sector. We don't really care how many dependents you have. We don't care what your medical situation is, because we could get in trouble for asking you private questions dealing with your health. It's part of HIPAA, the HIPAA law. So um, that's a lot of things that's a major difference between military recruiting and private sector
And
recruiting.
something else we talked about too, Fabian, is that when you're recruiting people for the military, or when you're the person coming into the military, again, whether you're coming as an officer or coming in as listed, the military hires you. They don't hire you for what you're doing now. They usually hire you for what you can do later on. Like they want your aptitude. What can we teach you how to do?
Right.
And then we hire you, and then we send you to the schools, and then we give you the training, and we do all this stuff, and then it might take a year until you're actually doing the business, and that's it for all branches of services. So you're not being hired for a specific opening as much as you're being hired for what you can do later on, right?
Correct, and that comes into play. We call it OJT, but what gives us that picture of what your trainability is your ASVAB score and your line scores on your ASVAB. So, for instance, they have an EL score, which is, I think, is electronics. Tells us exactly if you're going to be good in electronics. Or we have a GT score that you'll have to general technical score, where you'll have to score higher have a higher score on that to become an officer or for certain career fields. And then we bring you on board, depending on that score, your scores on your ASVAB, and it tells us what's your trainability, what's your potential for success for making it through that type of job training.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm seeing some of the comments that are on here. People chiming in saying they're where they're at. I got folks in Florida, Virginia Beach, San Diego, all kinds of places. Maryland. Hello to everybody. Those things that we just talked about. The differences between the military where they brought you in to teach you how to do stuff. In the private sector now, as a recruiter now, you're looking for people who are kind of already doing whatever it is they're doing. Like they need to have some documented. You got a specific role to fill, so how does that change the differences of what you're looking for?
Right. Unlike the military, where we can train you, your trainability comes into play. In the civilian sector or public sector, we're looking for you to come to us with those attributes already in hand. For instance, we can't qualify you for a position that you're applying for. If you don't have a PMP, a project manager certification, we can't get that for you to make you qualify for this position. Most of our qualifications are pretty much, especially if you're in the public sector where you're trying to work for a contract on the for the government. Those requirements are pretty much dictated to us, so we can't you know qualify you for that. If it go they even, some positions count down the number of days you've actually had experience as, a certain role. So if you don't have that PMP or that Security Plus certification or CISSP, those are some of the big certifications that can really help you when looking for a public sector um, position.
Yeah, we talked about that in our pre-call too, and you brought up some of those examples that I had forgotten about. Like I said, I wasn't an enlisted recruiter, but I know a lot of the enlisted recruiters,
Hmm.
they would work really hard on people. If somebody needed to drop 10 pounds to go to boot camp, they would get out there and do PT with them. If somebody needed to increase their ASVAB score, they would go out there and do stuff with them. There was all that work that would go into, and in the private sector, like you said, not only can you not ask that question, but they're not going to. Then the PMP or the certifications was a tremendous example of they're not going to say like, I really like you, I'm going to spend some extra time helping you study
Right.
for this particular certification.
Right. Now there are some jobs that will bring you on and actually pay for you to go get your certification, your PMP certification. But if it's a basic qualification for you coming in the door to get the position, then you're going to have that coming in the door. Same as education and experience. Some positions will say, okay, we will take you have to have a bachelor's degree, but if you're coming out of the military, if you don't have one, then there are not many positions that will say, okay, we'll take your job experience in lieu of a bachelor's degree to qualify you for this position. So that's something
Yeah.
that we have to take a look at also.
And we just had some comments that came in too that when we started bringing up PMP, I think it lit a fire under some people's, to make them think about some things. You already mentioned a little bit about, somebody asked, why don't more companies, help people to acquire their PMP or help with
Mhm.
certifications? And some companies will be doing those things. And then another question, I don't know if you have much to answer about this, Fabian, but if someone's currently working on a certification, can they should they still apply for jobs, or how would they list things of like, is it good for them to go ahead and identify that I'm working on this certification or that certification? Should you put it on your resume, like if it's in progress? What do you think about that?
Oh, well, I definitely think you should put it on your resume if it's in progress, but we have to keep in mind also you have to be successful in completing that certification. I've had the pleasure of speaking with great candidates for public sector roles that they started out, studying for a CISSP, one of the harder certifications, and they weren't successful in passing the first exam. So uh, they're actually interviewing for roles that require this certification, and when it comes down to it, then when you get in front of the hiring manager, he's going to actually like, were you successful? And it could be a ding on you if you said no, I wasn't successful in completing that. Maybe they look at you as, maybe you don't have the mental aptitude to be a good fit for this position. So you have to balance it out. What what you feel works best for you when actually putting on your resume that you're going for these s- uh, s- certifications.
And I'm going to bring this into something that we had, because these were questions that just came in live, so we didn't really prep for these questions, which
Mhm.
is fine, which is good. I love having the
Yeah.
live questions. But one of the things we did talk about was, we said that how the recruiter when you came in the military might have helped you lose weight or get a better ASVAB score.
Right.
But still, even though you can't help them lose weight or get a certification, one of the things that a good recruiter can do is a good recruiter can help you answer questions about whether or not to include it on your resume. You know, because you know the role, you know what that hiring manager is looking like, looks for. And one
Right.
of the things that people don't need to understand is that not every job process or hiring process is the same. So the thing that
Correct.
Fabian, is AWS, and
Correct.
you even know the hiring manager for that particular role. So I mean, do you do some work as far as giving that kind of advice on an individual basis if someone's basically qualified for everything else? And have you ever said, hey, you might want to clean this up on your resume, or just giving them tips on how to make it look good?
I do. I do it all the time. One of the big things that I find with veterans that are sending me their resume is a lot of veterans they do one resume for their whole gamut of jobs that they're applying to, that to include government jobs, and they put their disability rating and everything on there, which I recommend that you not do if you're going for a public sector position or a private sector position, because your disability rating and you being a disabled veteran, it won't come into play for a civilian sector job, and you may be doing yourself a disservice by letting them know, like, hey, I have a disability coming from the military, because civilians most of the time they think automatically you coming from the military. Not all, but a lot of them think that the first thing that comes to mind is PTSD, and so they're not going to ask you that question because it's illegal to ask you, but you put it on your resume, so you pretty much put it out there on what your disability is. You have a disability, and they won't come out and say that, hey, this is not why I'm hiring you. No, that they're just going to say, we found a better candidate to fit the position.
Yeah, so that's great, and that's like I said, we had talked about how unfortunately people looked at recruiters when they got the recruiter that brought them in the military. Not all the time. There's some very honorable recruiters that are out there, and I know a lot of them. And I like to
Mhm.
think that I was one of them, and I think that Fabian
Right.
probably was too. But we understand that there's not a great reputation, so it would be a mistake to think to yourself, I don't trust the recruiter for this process. I don't that
Right.
he or she's just trying to get one over on me, or trying to, that's a mistake I think that too many veterans make, is that they don't engage the recruiter with questions and honest dialogue about, or they think to themselves, well, I've always done it. The last guy told me to do it this way, so I'm going to always do it that way. The
Right.
recruiter knows the job, knows the company, knows the program, which those can all be different. Uh,
Right, and so with that, it does happen where I've heard it a million times. My recruiter lied to me, and I'd be putting my integrity in jeopardy if I say it doesn't happen, because it does. But military recruiters are under a lot of pressure, especially nowadays. You can imagine the Army itself. They have to bring in over 200,000 new enlistees a year, from a pool of less than 1% that actually qualify to enlist in the military. So, I just advise all of my enlistees that I enlist, hey, do your research, read your contract. You're in the delayed entry program. You have more than enough time to read your contract once you leave the military entrance processing station to go over that. Google's a great resource to find out anything that you have questions about dealing with your military enlistment. And on
yeah.
the civilian sector, they're definitely not gonna lie to you, as far as what you're going to be expecting. They're going to go strictly what the company offers. Our employee value proposition. We sell our company on, hey, attracting the best talent as possible.
You think about think about what drives those recruiters. If in a military recruiter, you're tasked with getting a certain number of people, every month, whether or not they complete boot camp or not. As long as they get to boot camp, you've done your job.
Right.
But for Fabian right now at Amazon Web Service, you know he's now judged on whether or not the person that he puts in that role stays there. You know,
Correct.
so
Correct.
it behooves him. It's not a quantity game for him. It's a quality game. He gets paid for putting the right person in that job so that that person doesn't leave and they don't have to start that process all over again 2 months later.
Right, because the cost of refilling that or backfilling that position is, I've heard rumors or I've studied data that says to rehire for a position that we lose people in, it's 2 times the amount, uh, of their annual salary to actually get those guys to refill that position after we bring you on board. So you're hitting the nail on the head when you say it's quality over quantity.
Yeah. All right. We got another question, which is actually great because this was a topic we were going to broach anyway coming up next, and it has to do with security clearances. And what we had talked about was, know your clearance before you get out. Some mistakes that
Correct.
we've seen people make because they thought they had a clearance or they lost their clearance. So we're going to jump off with Daniel had the question here, so we're going to use his question piece to kind of jump off into just the bigger deal about security clearances itself. So I'll just let you kind of take it on. Remember, we talked last week about knowing before you get out. What's
Right.
so important about that? How do you do it? And what kind of things have you seen people mess up on in the real world out there now?
So one thing that you definitely wanna do before transitioning from the military is know what your security clearance level is. And to find that out before you walk out that door is you wanna get with your facility security officer. If you've already transitioned and you're looking for a job and you need to know your security clearance, hopefully you have a relationship with your FSO and you can reach back and say, "Hey, do you think, could you provide me information on my security clearance?" If not, there is a way that you can, get that security clearance status by you have to submit a Privacy Act request through the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency to find out that status. Usually, secret clearances are good for up to 10 years. Top secret clearances are good up to 5 years. And of course, everybody was familiar with JPass, but there's no more JPass since the government has gone to a continuous evaluation process. So that means you don't have to worry about a periodic review or going back in and updating your SF-86 or your equip to on a periodic basis to do that. They're continuously evaluating your clearance and your actions outside of work. For instance, if you get a DUI, it's best for you to self-report that incident to your security officer before they do a evaluation on your security clearance, and you get dinged for not reporting that. So that's one big thing about it.
Yeah.
um,
Something else we brought up too, and I thought we had a good conversation, was depending on the job you have too. So if like you yourself, when you were in the army working signals corps type stuff, you had a high level clearance.
Correct.
But then when you went over to become a recruiter, you weren't using that high level clearance anymore. So even though you were still in the
Right.
army, you were losing days on the validity of that clearance, right?
Correct. So usually, if you have a clearance, let's say you have a TSSCI, and you go into a role that only supports a secret security clearance, well, most likely the employer is going to downgrade that security clearance, and it's going to be, if you're not using that security clearance for a maximum, for at least 2 years, then your process is going to start over. If you're in a job that doesn't require security clearance at all, then of course you're going to have to go through the entire security process all over again. So just know that your security clearance, if you're not using it, if you haven't used it, most likely in a 2 year period, most likely you're going to have to go through the entire security process all over again. And people are those security clearances coming out of the military are worth money. So definitely try and stay on top of how old your security clearance, if your job supports it, um, and you shouldn't have any problems.
I just heard a story today about somebody who works for a company that gets a security clearance bonus paid every quarter as long as they're with that company. And for having like a full scope poly, it's like 5 grand a quarter as a
Right.
retention bonus to just to stay there.
Right, right, and that's due to that fact that security clearances are so valuable. Amazon, AWS, we do also have a mission bonus for security clearances, so uh, it's out there. So,
Hmm.
clearances are worth a lot of money. The higher you go, like CI or full scope poly, you can look forward to receiving a very lucrative um, mission bonus to keep to hire you with that security clearance.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here because there's
Mhm.
something I really that being former recruiter myself, I talk to a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who come out of the service who want to get into human resources, talent acquisition, particularly
Okay.
if you became a senior enlisted person or a senior officer, and you think to yourself, I like the talent acquisition part. Lots of people coming out of that were recruiters, whether they were enlisted or officer recruiters.
Mhm.
So I mean that's exactly what you did, Fabian. You want to share with us just kind of like a little bit of your story of how did you get from being, because you were, what your last gig was, you were a senior recruiter, you were like a
Correct.
manager, station manager type person, and you had a lot to do with like chaplains and officers and stuff like that.
Right.
But how did you turn that into your first job as a private sector recruiter? Was it hard, was it easy, was it a smooth transition? What was it
It
like for you?
it was actually eye-opening because being a recruiter, I thought, coming out of military recruiting and coming into the civilian sector, it was gonna be pretty much the same thing, which it's pretty similar, but we use different methods for finding our candidates. So, we use a lot of job boards like cleared jobs like you have here. So, um, learn the back, boolean searches, x-ray searches, things of that nature. Also on LinkedIn, a lot of organizations look at how many connections you have. If you're a recruiter, then you should have plenty of connections on those like LinkedIn, those job boards. So you definitely want to make sure you get your connections up on that, and also bring your work ethic with you. A lot of people say, it's so easy being a civilian recruiter compared to military. Well, you're still going to have to work, especially if you come into a field where you're recruiting cleared candidates, and the pool is small, and so you're going to have your salesmanship hat on, and you're going to have to know your employees' value proposition, and you're going to have to sell them on your company, and you know, all of that salesmanship that you learned as a military recruiter will take you a long way in the civilian sector.
Yeah, you do quite. I don't know if it's quite a bit of traveling, but you definitely do some traveling. You were just in Colorado last week, so you do some job fair stuff, and then you also do some, sourcing, right? I mean,
Correct.
you're kind of what's your day to day or week to week? What are some general just parts of the job that go through becoming a good recruiter there?
Definitely, you have to get your battle, what we call, I'm going to go back to a military term, battle rhythm down. So once you become a recruiter, you're going to always have this battle rhythm down. So a day in a life of a civilian recruiter is, you're definitely going to check your applicant tracking system to see if you have any new applicants in that system that qualify for the position. That will lighten your load on sourcing for candidates if you have a qualified candidate who applied. If you've spoken to candidates in the past and they gave you a date to, like, hey, I'm going for a certification, I should have it within 60 days. If put it on your calendar to follow up with these guys on that 60th day to say, hey, did you get that certification? So same things that apply as a recruiter, as a military recruiter. You had to do, go out and meet people, get your leads, follow up with them, and continue to follow with them until you got them in the military. Still apply as a civilian recruiter. The difference is, instead of a military recruiter, you're going to be in charge of a certain region, some cities in a state that you're going to be covering. As a civilian recruiter, you can travel the world. I like you said, Bob. I've done a lot of traveling, a lot of job fairs. So and I like to do that. So you have to be open to that as a civilian recruiter.
Yeah, especially if you're working for a big company like AWS, because
Yes,
you guys have got a national presence, you've got a global presence
correct.
really, so you've got a lot of stuff that's going on. Well, we're getting ready to before we start closing things down. One of the things I want to highlight is he said, if you, it's always good to build your network, to connect on LinkedIn. So you can find Fabian Byrd on LinkedIn, you can find me, Bob Wheeler, on LinkedIn. Hit us up. We're happy to help out with anything. I also wanted to share that for anybody who is, you know, looking for things. There's a couple job fairs coming up too, that not only will I be at, I don't know if Fabian will be, but I know Amazon Web Services will be at both of these events. We've got one coming up Wednesday. It's in Huntsville, Alabama, for cybersecurity talent. So there's a big cybersecurity conference going on called the National Cyber Summit. So if you're in the area and you want to come to that job fair, even if you're not any of our job fairs, if you go to the link on our page and you submit your resume will go to all of the companies who are at those job fairs. So that would include, AWS is the one on Wednesday in Huntsville, Alabama. And then we've got another in-person event coming up October 6th, just a couple weeks from now, in Tysons Corner, Virginia, for all clearance levels. Same deal. You can get your resume submitted. If you're in the area, you can show up and talk to people. I'll be there. Amazon Web Service will be there doing a little face-to-face presentation too for job seekers before that event as well. Um, but it's good to know that those things are coming up, because if you're transitioning out, it really does. It behooves you to have a good network and to ask questions to lots and lots of people. Fabian, anything else you want to kind of say as we kind of close things out?
Not really. Just if you have any questions, please hit me up. If you're interested in becoming, interviewing for a position at Amazon AWS. If I am not the recruiter for that position, I will put you in contact with the recruiter is, and it kind of works out better that way. That you have a point of contact instead of uh, throwing your resume into our huge database. I can introduce you to other recruiters.
All righty. Well, I think this was a really great discussion. I'm super thankful for all the participation in the comments section too, that kind of helped throw some questions out there. Some that we were prepared to talk about, and some that we kind of caught on the fly. But I think we did a good job, Fabian.
Uh,
Um, at that point, it's right at it's been 27 minutes, so we kept this under 30 minutes, like we said we were going to. I hope everybody has a great rest of your Monday. And if you have any questions, find us at ClearedJobs.Net or find Fabian on LinkedIn. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.